Dan Decker. I'm Nicole Hickman, the engineering manager at Midwest Alarm Services. I'm here with our industry affairs manager, Dan Decker.
Hi, Nicole.
Dan, in our last episode, we covered the ground rules for Chapter 9, Sections 901, 903, and 904. Today, we're getting into Section 907.2, which is the section that answers the question everybody wants answered. When is a fire alarm actually required? There's a lot of ground to cover, so we're splitting this into 2 episodes. Today, we're going through occupancy groups A through I, so let's get into it.
Section 907 answers the question that everybody asks: do I need a fire alarm system for my new building? This is where you can figure out what the occupancy is and look at 907.2 and find out if a fire alarm is required for a particular occupancy, and if so, what type of fire alarm is required. It also requires occupant notification. Historically, that was a cause for confusion because when the building code used to say fire alarm, they meant something that you could hear, but people were interpreting that to mean that if you put in a fire alarm to monitor a sprinkler system, you then had to do occupant notification throughout the building. And that was never the intent. So it actually got the language in there now that says a fire alarm is required to activate occupant notification. And then under the sprinkler system, it just says it needs to be monitored. So one of the things that is kind of a given is that a fire alarm system requires at least one manual pull station be provided, even when other sections of the code allow you to eliminate the pull stations. Section 907.2 will also require occupant notification. It requires at least one manual pull station, even when other sections of the code allow you to remove the manual pull station if you got an automatic sprinkler system, and that activates the occupant notification system. There's also a smoke detector is generally required with every fire alarm system, one over the control panel. There's 2 exceptions to the minimum of one pull station. If you have a dedicated function fire alarm system where you're just operating an elevator, no manual pull station is required. And if you've got an R2 occupancy, an apartment occupancy, a pull station is not required unless the fire code official says it's needed for a fire watch. The exception for pull stations when you have a fully sprinklered building applies to just about every occupancy group. It might apply to all of them. So when a building is equipped throughout with an automatic sprinkler system that will automatically sound the occupant notification, there's an exception that says you can delete the manual pull stations at each exit. One of the questions we get is if the building has a sprinkler system in it, does that mean we can eliminate the pull stations? And it's maybe. If it's not fully sprinklered, and this comes up more often than you'd think, where you have a building that has a sprinkler system in one area, but maybe they didn't do the offices, that's not a fully sprinklered building, so the exception doesn't apply. Digging into the occupancy groups that require systems, the first one we stumble across is Group A, an assembly occupancy.
So that's good context. Group A is going to be your arenas, theaters, restaurants, houses of worship. So what does this code require?
Depends. A manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system is required when the occupant load is 300 or more. If you've got a restaurant that will be an A occupancy and it has less than 300 occupants, then a no fire alarm system is required. If it's 300 or more, then yes, we have to have a fire alarm system. And there's another caveat that if we've got more than 100 people, either above or below the level of exit discharge, that also triggers it. If you've got an E occupancy, such as a high school that has a gym that's used for assembly purposes, that is required to be provided with a fire alarm is required for Group E. The pull station sprinkler exception does apply in Group A, and we've got a couple of other exceptions. If you've got a Group A5, which is an outdoor bleacher exception, the fire alarm is not required for outdoor bleacher type seating with 300 to less than 15,000 occupants if they've got a PA system with standby power, and enclosed spaces that are attached to or within 5 feet of seating are less than 10% of the seating area, or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less. The enclosed spaces that are associated with the outdoor bleachers have to be separated by a 1 hour rated construction, and all means of egress are open to the outside. So for the most part, your typical high school football stadium is not going to require a fire alarm system. If you've got temporary outdoor bleachers, no fire alarm is required if there's no enclosed spaces that are under or attached to the seating, or the seating is erected for less than 180 days, and you've got an approved fire safety plan that deals with evacuation. We also get into more exotic forms of the fire alarm system when the occupancy goes above 1,000. So if you've got a group A occupancy with an occupant load of 1,000 or more, typically a theater or a concert hall will exceed 1,000 occupants. They shall have the fire alarm activated in emergency voice alarm communication systems. And that's just because when you've got 1,000 people, there's some logistics to getting everybody to exit safely. So that gives the opportunity for a responding code official to come in and issue directions if they want people to use a particular exit or avoid a particular exit. The last thing we've got under A occupancies is stadiums, arenas, and grandstands. If you've got a grandstand with 15,000 or more fixed seats and it provides audible public announcements and they have the scrolling notification, then the fire alarm system also has to provide either pre-recorded or real-time captions that go across either the screen. Sometimes they've got a scrolling banner around the stadium's seating, but if that's provided, then the fire alarm has to be integrated in with that.
Well, assembly covers a wide range of different building types. Group B is businesses, offices, clinics, and that kind of spaces. What triggers a fire alarm there?
Business occupancies are probably the most common next to residential occupancies. Most buildings that you'll find are probably classified as business occupancies. So it's pretty restrictive or non-restrictive, I guess, as to when a Group B occupancy has to have a fire alarm system. One of the tests is if you've got a combined occupant load of 500 or more, then you have to have a fire alarm system. Or if you've got an occupant load of more than 100 above or below the lowest level of exit discharge, or if you've got an ambulatory care facility in the Group B occupancy, then a fire alarm system is required. Ambulatory care facilities are kind of a new entrance into the Class B or the Group B occupancies, and that requires an automatic smoke detection system within the facility and in public use areas outside the tenant spaces that include public corridors and elevator lobbies. The exception to that is if an automatic sprinkler system will automatically activate the occupant notification system, then the smoke detection system is not required. We've got, this is one of the first groups that's affected by the new IBC change, trying to tackle the issue with lithium-ion battery requirements. So if we've got laboratories, which is a B occupancy, involving research and testing of lithium-ion or lithium metal batteries, they shall be equipped with a fire alarm system activated by either air sampling smoke detection system or a radiant energy detection system. Those are commonly known as a hazardous system or a flame detection. And this is new in the 2024 edition, and it covers a number of different occupancies. So probably going forward, I'll just refer to it as the lithium-ion requirements, because they're the same requirements in each occupancy.
So that seems to be showing up in multiple places now, which makes sense given how much battery storage has changed in the last few years. Group E covers schools and educational facilities. I know that these have some specific requirements around voice evacuation, similarly to assembly occupancies. What's the story there?
Yes, Group E occupancies under the International Building Code require a fire alarm system with an emergency voice alarm communication system. The exceptions are pretty limited. Evacs is not required for occupant loads of 50 or less. So that would probably be your portable trailers that they bring in for a class or two. 50 is a pretty small number in terms of a school. For occupant loads of 100 or less, evacs is not required, provided the occupant notification is still provided through horns and strobes. So we've kind of got a tiered approach. You have to have a fire alarm system in a Group E occupancy. If it is under 100 occupants, it can be done with horn strobes. And if it is over 100, then yes, you're into an emergency voice alarm communication system. There is a pull station exception for Group E that says the pull stations are not required where all of the following apply. One, your interior corridors are protected by smoke detectors. Two, auditoriums, cafeteriums, gymnasiums, and similar areas are protected by heat detectors or other approved devices. If you've got shops and laboratories that involve dust and vapors, they are protected with heat detectors, and manual activation is provided from a normally occupied location. So that's one way of not putting pull stations at all the exits in schools, because we all know kids would never pull a pull station, right?
No, not mine.
I better not catch mine doing it either. This also has the fully sprinklered building exception that you can delete the pull stations under that requirement.
So moving on from kids, we'll leave those at home. Let's talk about factory occupancies. So Group F covers factory and industrial occupancies. What triggers are there?
Surprisingly, not much. In a Group F occupancy, a fire alarm is required when both of the following conditions are met. First, the occupancy is 2 or more stories in height. So you can have a sprawling factory that covers acres and acres, and as long as it's 1 story, there's no fire alarm requirement. In the second requirement is not only does it have to be 2 stories or more in height, the occupant load is 500 or more above or below the lowest level of exit discharge. Both conditions must be met. So as a general rule, most factories aren't required to have a fire alarm system. They typically have them for other reasons. We've got the pull station sprinkler exception, and we've got the 2024 IBC change dealing with lithium-ion battery manufacturing. And that pretty much has the same thing that you've got to have air sampling detection or flame detection throughout the entire fire area where batteries are manufactured, and where vehicles, energy storage systems, or equipment containing the batteries are assembled as part of the manufacturing process. So yes, wherever the batteries go, that's where we need the advanced detection to pick that up.
Factory occupancies have a pretty clear 2-part trigger. So Group H is hazardous. These are occupancies that deal with flammable materials, chemicals, that type of use. What does the code say here?
The code says that a fire alarm is required for Group H5 occupancies and in any occupancy that's used for the manufacture of organic coatings. The requirement is for automatic smoke detection, and it has to be installed for occupancy using highly toxic gases, organic peroxides, and oxidizers per the applicable chapters of the International Fire Code. Basically, if we're getting into a Group A H occupancy, I can almost guarantee you we've got a fire protection engineer involved, and he's going to be doing not only the minimum code requirements, but other things that make sense for that particular site.
So Group I is where things start getting more complex. These are institutional occupancies, group homes, hospitals, nursing facilities, detention facilities. I know the requirements here are more detailed based off of, more detailed than other groups.
Yes. And I made the mistake one time of not realizing that the fire alarm requirement applies to all Group I occupancies. So if you look into a sub-occupancy and don't see something specified, that doesn't mean that it isn't required to have a fire alarm system. So overall, all Group I occupancies have to have a fire alarm system. Here's our exception that proves our rule. The pull station sprinkler exception does not apply to Group I occupancies. Instead, pull stations Group I1 and I2 are not required at exits if they're located at a care provider control station, which we used to call nursing stations. Occupant notification is not required to be activated when private mode signaling is approved by the fire code official, and staff evacuation responsibilities are included in the fire safety evacuation plan. So this is pretty much exclusively healthcare. Group I1 requirements, specific requirements for group homes and assisted living, is that smoke detection is required in corridors, any waiting areas that are open to a corridor, and habitable spaces other than sleeping units and kitchens. So the exceptions are the smoke detection in the habitable spaces is not required in a fully sprinklered facility, and smoke detection is not required for exterior balconies, which kind of makes sense. It's a concern if a fire starts on an exterior balcony, but we don't put smoke detectors out there. Smoke alarms shall be installed on the ceiling and walls outside of each separate sleeping area and in each room used for sleeping purposes and on each story within a dwelling unit. And that's per section 907-211, which is we'll cover eventually, but that deals with the single station smoke alarms. Getting into the group I2, hospitals and nursing facilities, smoke detection is required in corridors and waiting areas open to the corridors, but then it has an exception that says the smoke detection is not required in smoke compartments containing sleeping units where a visual display is provided on the corridor side of each sleeping unit and an audible and visible signal is provided at the nurse's station. Also not required where doors are equipped with automatic door closing devices with integral smoke detectors that perform the required alerting function. And those are pretty much gone today. The last time I saw door closers with integral smoke detectors in them, the devices were like 30 years old and are being replaced, and they don't have a replacement device for them other than to add spot detectors and replace the door holder. Group I3, dealing with prisons, jails, and detention, requires a manual alarm system and an automatic smoke detection system for alerting staff. The activation of a sprinkler system, pull station, or automatic fire detector shall initiate a signal that automatically notifies staff. It isn't a requirement to notify occupants that are behind bars because there's not a whole lot they can do about it. The pull station placement exceptions, pull stations are not required at exits if they're provided at staff-attended locations, and pull stations in detainee areas are permitted to be locked provided staff members are present and have keys. So there's the reason we call them institutional pull stations, as they're key operated and they're used in these types of institutions. Automatic smoke detection is required throughout we'll call it resident housing areas and related common spaces. The exception is that smoke detectors are not required in sleeping units with 4 or fewer occupancies in a fully sprinklered smoke compartment.
Well, that's a lot of info we just covered. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Code Corner with Dan Decker. Dan, as always, thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Next time, we're picking up where we left off in section 907.2, covering the remaining occupancy groups, including mercantile, residential, and storage. There are some 2024 code changes in there that building owners and property managers will want to know about. We will see you then.